So CBC Radio-Canada is in the middle of a transition between past models and future model to come. And we wondered how this transformation is actually going to pan out on the different platforms, on the TV and the web, and perhaps to get an idea of what's coming up, we're going to have a discussion with our panelists.
Introduce our sixth panelists. Et on va commencer par mon ami et collègue, M. Patrice Roy.
I'm going to start with my colleague, Mr. Patrice Roy. He started Maison de Radio-Canada in 1989. I'm laughing, so I'm not going to look at you. Patrice was journalist at Anjou for the first 3 seasons of this show, and he won a Gémeaux Prize in 1990. And since 2008, he's been your anchor at the Téléjournal Grand Montréal at 6 p.m. EC Télé, as well as hosting special information programs when there are big events in the political life of Quebec and Canada. So please, let's welcome Mr. Patrice Roy. Yes, good afternoon to all of you. Thank you.
Diana Swain is a CBC News senior investigative journalist and recently named as a host of CBC News Network. Diana's work is frequently seen on the national and CBC Television's flagship investigative program, The Fifth Estate. She also regularly fills in for Peter Mansbridge on the national. She has won the Gemini Award for Best News Anchor 3 times in a row and was the first woman in Canada to win the award. Please welcome Diana.
Charles Tissier, since 1992, has been hosting one of the most popular science magazines in the world. Découverte, have you seen his new Facebook, Charlotte? Yes, it's really worth looking at that. So whether as a reporter or as a host, he's also had the opportunity of participating in many special programs on events of historical importance, such as the tragedy of Lac Mégantic or the drama at the École Politique in Montreal. So please welcome Mr. Charles Tissier.
Merci, Rebecca.
Bonjour, Charles.
Bonjour.
Good afternoon, Charles. And my colleague, Christine Trottier, is pursuing a career that reflects her passion for arts as host and cultural journalist. Listeners and TV viewers of Radio-Canada have no doubt got to know her thanks to her art segments, C'est bien meilleur le matin, Montréal Exprès, which became Des Hôtels, Montréal Ce Soir, and Le Point. And after hosting the Daily Show, Beau Temps, Mauvais Temps, for 5 years on the airwaves of Espace Musique, she's at the helm every morning with La Mélodie de Bonheur on Ici Musique. Marie-Christine.
Mr. Mike Finnerty is currently in his 7th season as host of CBC Montreal's local weekday morning radio show, Daybreak. Mike has more than 2 decades experience as a journalist and a broadcaster, beginning at CBC Quebec City and then later in Montreal as a reporter. Mike has hosted CBC Radio Montreal's election coverage since 2006, and he also frequently hosts The Current across CBC Radio 1. Monsieur Mike Finnerty, bonjour.
Welcome. Good afternoon. And then last, but certainly not least, you all know this person because since 1990, Fabienne Larouche has written or co-written more than 1,200 hours of fiction for TV and cinema. And since the foundation of the Atios production house in 1999, she's been producing her own works and those of other authors. And I'm sure that you know some of her great productions, such as Unité 9, Trauma, or Virginie. So Fabienne Larouche, welcome as well to you. Thank you very much, dear colleagues.
Les applaudir chaleureusement.
Yes, you can give them a good round of applause. Now, Patrice, we're going to start with you. The subject today is transforming to reflect you. Radio-Canada, CBC is changing, so are you. So how does that actually have an impact on your daily life? Well, Rebecca, earlier, you can see to me in French, you said paradoxically, Canadians, in the majority, they tend to still follow by TV and radio. And I think Hubert also cited a figure, I think it was 87%, wasn't it? So we have to bear in mind that when I'm talking about myself as a newscaster, and I'm sorry for my voice, that's not my normal style, but I do have a problem with my throat. But we have to remember that this relationship is important in this crisis situation. We're going through a moment of crisis, that's obvious. And Hubert was talking about passion. There's concerns, there's a passion, there's real worries. And in that moment of crisis, we have to remember the relationship between the listeners, including you who are here and following us via internet, those who are interested in Canada and Radio-Canada. And I think that's what has to really be of prime importance here. Otherwise, when we're talking about news, when we're in this world where news is traveling very fast in this digital age, people need even more to have explanations so that we can actually tidy up this chaos which we often see in a day of news. But what has changed, for example, there's an extraordinary file that we were presenting, and here I'm advertising this. This was the Téléjournal yesterday, the newscast at 6 p.m., where we drew a comparison between Montreal and Toronto with two similar districts, but they were very different. There was one which was not planned in Montreal and the other one that was actually planned in Toronto, and we were listening to different citizens. But the difference is that if I say to my kids, look at this, they can look at it on the phone whenever, wherever, when they want. So our content travels around. As I could never even have imagined this on Twitter and Facebook and so on and on different social networks. Now, we can't say to people, if you're not there at 6 p.m., you've missed it. People don't want to miss anything anymore. Now, I don't want to monopolize their time, but I think that we have to also bear something else in mind, and I'd like to really drive this home. Namely, in this digital world, and of course, it will become ever more digital. There's this major transformation. But in that new digital world, we still have two eyes, one nose, and one mouth. We need journalists. They're not going to be replaced by machines. They need to digest this and explain these news and understand these different complex relationships to try and give credibility, to see whether something has credibility or not. So that is our role in the digital age. We have to maintain that role. We stand there for credibility, so we need to have an army in order to be able to wage this battle. Of course, we'll be able to talk about that. Of course, the environment has changed. We've opened up the windows. We've thrown them open. 7 years ago, we said, just write into us. We still say that sometimes to the public. Now, some parts of the public are more engaged in terms of news. Often they want to give us news. They are starting to collect the news as well, aren't they? Yes, but they're also participating in the debate, the discussions. And the reaction of the public's actually guiding us and allowing us to evolve over time to know how we're going to deal with this the next day and the day after. So we're not closed in our studio walls. We're there and we're very present. The TV is really present. So if public is actually involved via Twitter and Instagram in collecting the news, what is the place of a newscast, the Téléjournal? Well, we still have an important role because we have to talk over the day. We all know what's happened. It's not at 6 p.m. that I discover something. I'm not informing you, Fabienne, who I think follows me every evening, and I'm not telling you about all the news because you work a great deal. Perhaps you haven't got time to keep up with it all, but I give you the context. I give the accompanying interviews and more explanations, and that's what we do with the newscast. And Patrice, when you're talking about collecting news, of course, we have to have that validated. So how do you actually proceed once you get in all of this news, for example, that comes from citizens? Well, once again, I use my two eyes, my nose and my mouth. The journalists know we can't be replaced. We're not going to disappear. We're not going to be wiped off the planet. And people are right that they've got certain fears. But there needs to be an army of people behind all this because otherwise things are not going to work. And we need to have time to investigate all this, look into it in more detail. We've got our colleague in Jerusalem, for example, Sophie, sent off to Africa and so on. I really think that we need to have the foundation. It needs to be retained. Then afterwards, we've got lots of different pipelines, lots of different networks. We have to be rapid. We have to be everywhere. But we need to keep this foundation that needs to be maintained.
I think moving to a digital world doesn't mean that we diminish the journalism or the production that we deliver. It means it's delivered on a different platform. And it doesn't mean that you give up one to pursue another. To me, it's something that we're adding to our repertoire, adding to the way that we deliver to Canadians. And I have two children, one's in university. I don't know the last time he sat in front of a television screen. Notwithstanding the numbers of people who still do, that's not the way he consumes what he wants to get. But that doesn't mean he doesn't want to get it from CBC. It means he's getting it in a different way. I have a daughter who's a teenager, who's a competitive hockey player. When we were in Sochi delivering the Olympics, her mom was on TV. You know where she was watching it? On the iPad.
Right.
I mean, that's the way she was getting the content. As a broadcaster, I see that as an opportunity for me to grow and to develop the way that I deliver my work in a different way. But more importantly to me, to someone who's been at CBC for 24 years and a Canadian the whole time, it matters to me how CBC positions itself. It matters to me that we have a CBC. I think we're growing. And I understand, you know, as well as anyone does, that we are shrinking on some levels. But I think that the conversations have to be separated sometimes. And I don't think going in a digital direction is a bad thing. For me as a journalist, it's been another opportunity to try to showcase my work and get it out there to people who might otherwise not have consumed it. So I think that the digital side is one discussion. I think the things that are happening around CBC, around budgets and cuts
Is another.
is another discussion, and too often they're paired.
Mike, how does your audience contribute to your work? Does it?
It has revolutionized the way we do our morning show here in Montreal. The way people communicate with us is so organic. We have in the morning we have text message communication with our listeners, and the text messages are given in a number by the phone number, and so I know how many people have texted. Over the course of the last several years, we now have 13,500 people who regularly text us during the program. And they text us to make contributions. They text us because they'll be listening to the mayor and they'll say, ask him this. Or if he's answered in a way where they think, that's not right, say, hey, he just said this, you better check that out. I can't tell you the number of times that has made a difference in real time as the program is taking place. Just to have that kind of contact is a constant contact. Our program, at least one or most often two subjects a day, and sometimes more, come from people coming to us because of the way that kind of organic relationship has grown. And I would say I'd go further than to just talk about revolutions in technology, because obviously it is kind of awesome what's happened over the last even 5 years. But it's not just technology. It's the way people think about how they exchange with other media. The internet is a state of mind, if you will. I mean, it's empowered people. People talk back to you. They don't. It's nothing like what it was when I was a boy, and that has really changed what we do and changed it for the better. I love coming to work every day because I never know what's going to happen, and I'm always in such close contact with our listeners.
So this transformation is necessary, according to you, then?
It just is. I mean,
I
can't imagine doing the show the way we used to do it 5 years ago today. It just wouldn't work. I mean, it wouldn't make sense. And you know, I think that the people who listen to us just feel a tremendous sense of ownership over the program as a result. They see it as their morning show. And, you know, last night I was at this guy who has a restaurant in one of the neighborhoods here in Montreal, in Rosemont, who moved from Toronto a few years ago, married a Québécoise. They switched the channel between Marie-France Bazot, and like she's in the kitchen, it's Marie-France Bazot, and if he's in the kitchen, it's Daybreak. And he wanted to start up, he wanted to give back to the community. He wanted to start a thing where he collects socks for the homeless because he heard that as a documentary on the Sunday edition. So he reached out to me, do you think this is a crazy idea? Nope. And off it went, and he's already got this big kind of barrel of socks, and I mean, that's the kind of way people reach out to us now. They really feel that we are theirs and vice versa.
Comment ça se reflète ça dans la création?
And how's that reflected in the creation of fiction programs? Well, I'm not there to inform, I'm there to entertain. It's a different matter. A good story is a good story. The TV viewers, well, you've got to go out and get the viewers where they are. And of course, whether we're back at home with my nieces, they're not going to see this on the TV directly. Often they'll catch up on Saturday, but a good story is always a good story. And what we can see in ATS, in our production houses, that there are people who want to come and see us directly. Do they contribute? Yes, of course. Today, we're very productive on social media. We've got our Facebook page, and we also intervene during the shows. But often it's more during the ads, because when you're listening to a story, you don't want to be sending in your feedback. So in fiction, we're there to entertain and to get the TV viewers in where they are. But how can you actually ensure that there's a good TV programs when you've got Netflix and Vice and others as well? Yes, you've got to be there. You've got to go and get them. You've got to be profitable. It's got to be worth it. You've got to get the TV viewers in. They're not going to come to us. It's us to go and get them. So that's the job that we have to do. And what Fabienne's not said, you also use this mirror image, a young person who sees the other young person on the screen, on social media and on the web. You're already recognizing that in a tangible way, and it's very present in your reality. Yes, today we live in society, so of course we want to resemble or look like society. That's part of the discussion. It's not like with the news, but that's what we're doing. Well, we've all got our cross to bear. Well, Patrice and myself, we're always together, and I'm very happy because there's 30 seconds between us two for the ads. That's all that separates us. That's great. You're almost stuck to me. That's great. Now, do you want us to leave you alone for a while? But anyway, how do you ensure that you can get the loyalty of TV viewers? Because we've been saying that you could look at House of Cards on Netflix, for example, and gobble that up for 4 hours. Well, that's interesting because I listen to House of Cards, and I listen to that for 10 hours when it comes out, but also Homeland, for example, Sunday night at 9 p.m. because I really love that. So people come and listen to Unité 9 at 8 p.m. on Tuesdays because they want to follow that with us. And people still get together to follow this sort of show. Because as I've said, a good story remains a good story. And that's my job. And if you miss it then the next morning, no, we couldn't work together. I'll have to go off and just get some chocolate cake now. Now, Découverte, this is a very, very popular program. It's very present. It's on all of the different platforms such as ici, Tout TV, ici, Explora, ici, Radio-Canada. So with these flagship programs, Découverte, how does that actually embody all of the values of the public broadcaster? We do our best, but with the budgetary reductions, we can't do it as much as we would like to. We started 3 weeks late, and there were some repeats. And at the prime time, we've got some repeats for. There's one that's a repeat again. So that means we are doing our work in terms of the quality of our work. And when it comes to the quantity of our offering, it's really reducing. In the 21 years of Découverte, I've never gone through that. I've been at Radio-Canada for 40 years. There have been one budgetary cycle after another. I think we're about 600 or 700 million cuts that I've seen since I've been at Radio-Canada. I've never seen cuts like this, and the cuts that are being imposed on us are part of this wave, but at the end of this wave. So I think we've gone too far. We don't have enough resources to do what we have to do and do it correctly. And Radio-Canada is a cultural institution which is of capital importance in French and in English. And this institution has to be supported by the successive governments that have accompanied us. And there needs to be reinvestment to help us to do our work correctly. We're talking about the digital shift. Of course, we have to make this a digital shift. It is important to do that. But when it comes time to do that, we've got disinvestment. We've talked about La Presse. What has La Presse done when it did its digital shift? There were 60 million extra investments. What are we doing? We're actually cutting. And I would like to add something here. And in Découverte, we're doing remarkable work with the web to actually roll out our programs on that platform. For example, there was a report on the web which was really remarkable on exploration, possible exploitation and the environmental consequences, for example, in the Gulf of St. Lawrence and Anticosti. And that was all spelled out on the web. And we did the same thing with the small probe and also with Lake Megantic. So we are undertaking this digital shift, but we've got diminished resources. And those who are the driving force behind this, the young people, are being put out the door. So this has to stop, and the government has to understand that Radio-Canada, CBC, is an essential institution in this country, and we need to be supported. We need their support. Yes, I've taken up what you've said. Should we compete then with other players? No, it's hard to hear, isn't it, at the moment? We want young people, as being chanted in the room. Thank you very much, sir. I feel that I'm involved. So should we compete with big players such as Vice? We talked about Vice earlier. Well, why not? We should compete with everyone. But what we're saying is that we need to be given the means to do this. We've got an immense amount of talent in-house, but we just need to be given the resources and just watch as we're going to be doing great work. But at the moment, we're being cut off. It's the power behind CBC that's doing this, and it's not because it's the Conservative government. Look at what the Liberals did beforehand. It's nothing new, all of these cuts. Now, that's true. Right, well, we'll be coming back to that during the question period. You can put questions directly, but now I'm going to turn towards Marie-Christine Trottier. Thanks very much, Charles, who's an expert in the cultural domain and everything to do with musicians. And I'm not from Charles' generation, and I've gone through many changes, even though I haven't been here as long as Charles. I know what you're talking about when we talk about transformations, changes in CBC. Yes, it's true with the digital and the immediate world, and it's all become very organic, and we need to be close to people and the regions. It's really important when you're a host. It's so important for someone who lives to the north of Sudbury who writes into me, or someone who's in the north of Alberta. I'd like to talk about people in the north, but there's people who are listening to us from everywhere, and it's the first time that I'm really living through this as a host. Before, we received letters sometimes, or there was someone on the phone who took calls, but of course that doesn't work like that anymore. So that's one side of this. We're talking about having a support platform, but we need to have the content that follows this basis, this support. And we cannot deny the fact that where I'm working, positions have been abolished. And one of the most noble positions in Radio-Canada is the researcher position. The researcher is someone who plays a crucial role when we're transmitting knowledge. They have to look at the research of knowledge and do research into subjects to ensure that the host comes out with silly things or something that doesn't add up. So the researcher and the producer, we need all of these noble professions that we've known here. And now we're being told that we have to shrink all of this and have something that's more up to date, and we need to look to the future. Once again, I'm not against progress. I'm not a Luddite. No one here is against progress. It would be impossible to be against progress. And now I'm working in the musical domain. I've worked in lots of different sectors here, but now I'm really dealing with the musical segment at EC Musique, and we've had the crisis with the records, for example, when everything went digital, and then the streaming came in, and Spotify, Google, NPR, and all the rest. Radio continued, listeners continued to listen to us, but it will never replace someone who speaks to you and someone says that music, well, perhaps you'd like it if you got to know it. So I'm worried when I just listen to music non-stop. And now, Rebecca, we work together for the same studio, and we try to think about all of this because, of course, we have to be inventive with these cuts. So we try and we think of ways in which we can get people in, and we develop our web page, and we try to be really connected into what's happening. We try to get the exclusive moments where we can listen to music. We try and establish communication, direct communication. We adapt to the changes. But we want this to be backed up. We've got excellent people putting contents on our web page, but we know that we're moving further towards this. But I've got lots of listeners who've not yet got a computer. So what should I say to these people? I say, well, it'll come. Perhaps you'll get one at Christmas. No, that's not what I say. Now, musicians, of course, have been forced to adapt to these new realities as well and use the social media and Twitter, Instagram. For example, with Taylor Swift, started using it very quickly. That's one example. But how can CBC and Radio-Canada keep this a close link with the artistic community? Well, Mike was talking about citizens earlier who directly contact him. They can send in, for example, a question to the Mayor of Montreal, and that's what we do as well. For example, this morning, Fred Pellerin, well, everyone was having a love-in with him. He launched his album, and I put the question to Fred Pellerin on behalf of people, and he answered. So he was he answered by Twitter. It was all visual. You have to use imagination here. And Rebecca, I would like us to come back to the past. There's a great deal of nostalgia, of course, in what we're saying. I'd like us to come back to performance and really capturing of this, but it's very difficult to see all of that actually disappearing. I think we have to find some way of having live shows on air again, and would that be a way of keeping the link with the artistic community? Yes, absolutely. Patrice, you'd like to add something? Charles, earlier you put a question. People were talking about Vice News. I've been hearing that for a few months now about this, and it's very fashionable to talk about Vice News. There's lots of clicks, but there's no context. And they go out into all the different markets in the country and they put videos up on anything. Anything goes. Anything's acceptable. That's not what we want to do in Radio-Canada with our news casts. That's not the model we're moving towards. We need to, journalists have said, to verify of this, to see whether there's more credibility attached to this pizza, so to speak. When we go digital, doesn't mean we do any old thing, because Vice News is very successful for a certain sector of the population. Is it in the Far West? Is that what you're driving at? No. Vice News is sent out over the web, but it's a news model where they're playing at the frontier between entertainment and news, and it's mixed up, but there's no context, and it's exactly the opposite of what we need to continue to do. Namely, we want to give people context, have a serious investigative journalist, and check again, see whether this is true or not, and explain all of that. And to come back to what was already said, we need to have people, we need to have live people, we need to have journalists involved in all scenarios. We need to have a newsroom. And yes, we need to have young people, as we've said on Tout le Monde en Parle. We're sad when we see young people leaving. We need to find some way collectively together of ensuring that talent doesn't walk out the door. And that has happened. They go elsewhere. If people are gifted by Radio-Canada, off they go. We want to be the pole that's attracting them all in. And news, I don't know if it's our soul or our heart. We're one or the other. I think, Fabienne, aren't we? I'm news with information. Perhaps you're the heart, or I'll take the soul and you take the heart. I don't know, whatever you want. But anyway, that is very valuable. And that's why people feel passionate about this. And that's why you're reacting this way, Shell. And that's why people came on Sunday and joined this march, because they're profoundly attached to that way of doing things. And just give me one last second. Now, of course, I listen to everything and I read a lot as well, and I hear people. And there's some people in the House who think this as well. Who think people are resisting change and they're stuck in the past. But I'd invite all of you, and you can call me up, but I'd invite you to come into our studio. There are 12 people working there 1 year ago, but now it's all been computerized, and there's just 3 people who are working in there. And they work really hard. It was a very difficult transition. We've accepted that. It was very difficult for people who were losing their job. Of course, they didn't want that to happen. But we said, OK, that's the new way of producing TV with less people. But there were efforts, there were technical problems, there were tears. Fortunately, we've got less of that now. Less technical problems. So for those who think that there hasn't been any transformation, that's not true. There have been enormous transformations. There's less people around me when I'm doing my newscast, and we do more with less. But as Charles and others are saying and have said, there is a limit. It's a question of how far can we go before it's too much. Everyone agrees that there needs to be transformation. We're living out this transformation. Of course, we've all got our smartphones and everything.
Conversation sometimes takes us in odd directions, because I think there are 2 conversations happening in parallel all the time. They keep crossing and getting mixed up. I mean, I don't think there's anybody in this room that I can imagine who is in favor of cuts. There hasn't been anyone that I've worked with at CBC in 24 years who's been in favor of cuts. Right. I mean, it defies your imagination. Every one of us knows what our colleagues do, and we understand what we lose when we lose any one of them, what they contribute to what we do overall, what we put out on the air, what we communicate to Canadians. There's nobody who's championing that. Then there's this other discussion about what do we do going forward and how do we present ourselves.
Because we have to go forward, yes.
You go forward or you stop. There really aren't a whole lot of choices, and I think all of us want to find a way to continue to be relevant. We also want to continue to find a way to be able to hire people,
which is why
and not always see them going out the door.
Which is why I want to go back to ce que Patrice tu disais à propos de.
So, Patrice, what you're saying about Vice, it's true, it's sexy, it's attracting 130 million viewers and so, but you've had your second already. You've had even more than a second.
Diana and Mike, should we compete with them? Should we compete with them? Of course.
Yes, we already do.
Diana and Mike, we haven't heard you in a while.
You've had your second.
Competing on some level with whatever else is out in the marketplace since CBC began.
Right.
I mean, certainly the number of competitors was a lot smaller. The platforms in which we were competing were a lot smaller. But we've been competing the whole time. We should continue to compete.
We should continue to compete,
if we're
is what
not
you're saying.
good at our jobs, that's the way to find out. We are good at our jobs. I'm not afraid of competition.
Okay.
I never have been. I'm not afraid of Vice. I'm not afraid of Google. I'm not afraid of whatever else you're putting out there. CBC delivers a good product across the country. It always has. Bring it.
Well, I think...
Bring it. I like that. Bring it.
Look at when Canadians are faced with a crisis, where do they turn? They turn to Radio-Canada, they turn to CBC. I know, when I was not working in the afternoon, I'm a morning show host, where did I go? I went to Patrice, who was on Radio-Canada, and to Peter Madridge on the CBC. The fact that we are the public broadcaster means that there is a great deal of pressure on us to be accountable to the Canadian people. And we have the authority, and you see it when the shizzle hits the fan. And that's what happened a couple of weeks ago, and I thought we demonstrated. I was very proud that day. I was moved. I was glued to my TV and my radio, and that's where people go to when they need to. And do we compete with Vice? We mop the floor with Vice on that.
Wow. You guys are so combative. We mop the floor, bring it. Merci à nos panélistes. On a terminé.
Thank you very much to our panelists. That's the end of that discussion, but please remain up on the scene.